what's up, man? So I keep on getting these messages, right? Private messages from a lot of different anglers, mainly really young anglers, asking about tournaments, like tips and things like that. And to be honest with you, I really don't know how to answer them. I know how to answer them, but I can't answer them in one line um, sentences because it really doesn't allow me to elaborate on what I needed to be talking about. It doesn't really, it's really a disservice. You know what I'm saying? Because there's not that there's some trick, but as I've been thinking over and over and over about how to answer these, and I just don't know how to answer them by typing it. It just takes too long. I figured I'd do a video over it. So it's not my usual fishing videos. Y'all know I don't really talk a lot on the videos. I'm trying harder to, but a lot of them are in tournaments. I don't talk a lot, and the other ones when I'm just out there fishing. A lot of times I do stuff like this afterwards because, man, I'm just not used to talking while I'm fishing, especially if I'm out there by myself and explaining why I'm doing things. It's usually going on in my head. It's why I don't talk a lot. So we actually talk a lot outside of fishing with my buddies and stuff. We talk about stuff all the time. It's just never a video camera around. So this was a lot easier when I get these questions. And one of them was like, hey, I'm starting up in high school fishing. Like, what are your tips for tournaments? And like I said, I mean, I don't really like all the standard issue answers. I mean, let's just face it. Like, I think they're old, they're boring. I think they've heard it out of a magazine, so they pass it on from a magazine. I think they've heard it out of someone say it, so they pass it along, but does it really help? I mean, it's the same old thing. It's the same old song and dance. And to be honest with you, I just don't know. I mean, maybe it helps for some guys, but for me, it didn't ever help. I'll tell you the things that helped me, and it might not help you, but like I said, this is how I looked at things. And so when I started fishing when I was pretty young, man, I was just trying to catch fish. Like, that's all there was to it. Winning tournaments. Luckily, I started on Livingston, and I mean, Livingston's a little bit different lake. You got a lot of 3 to 4 and 5 pounders in it. Not a whole bunch of fives, a lot of threes, some fours, some fives, twos. You didn't really catch a whole bunch of fish. And where I lived at on the south end of the lake, there you really didn't catch a lot of fish. So usually if you just catch 5, you could pretty much make a top 5 down there. So that's kind of how it all started. And it's funny with this whole MLF, BASS, FLW thing, 5 fish, whatever. Man, like I said, back then, just trying to catch 5 almost won you the tournament sometimes. And the way I fished seemed to, like, if you could just catch 5, 6, 7 a day, you had a really good shot at winning. Almost if you caught 10 keepers in a day, you were probably going to win the tournament just based on the fact that they were bigger. So it kind of depends on where you're at. As I moved on, fishing other lakes, most of the time I was just trying to get a bite. A lot of the reasons I caught bigger fish were because of the style I fished, but I didn't really, I always just was trying to catch a big fish. I mean, as a young kid, who's not trying to catch your biggest fish? That's all you cared about. Like, I could go out there and catch 30 fish, but I mean, I could not wait to come home and call my dad or tell my dad, hey, look at the big one I caught. So with that being said, that's just kind of how it progressed. As I got to Rayburn, man, things were way different. Like, you catch a bunch of fish, you can catch hundreds on Rayburn, and never even come close to winning a tournament. So there was a big factor of trying to catch small fish, and then it took me years to figure out how to consistently catch a big fish, but I actually had to go fish for them. And I'm not saying I even know how to now. I think you can catch a big fish out there doing a lot of different things. I just stick with those things that consistently try to catch big fish. And deep, shallow, offshore, next to the bank, it really doesn't matter. I mean, I've learned that you can catch it. We've caught big ones. We've caught 10 pounders in a foot of water and 30 something foot of water and doing every which way technique possible. So the tournament stuff what I wanted to start answering questions about was like, what's your advice? Well, my advice is this: get out there and just learn to catch fish, no matter which way you can, right? And I was never a big finesse guy, and I'm still not. I'm learning to get better at that. It's a good way to be really, really consistent, and it does catch you. It can catch you a big fish. It doesn't do well most of the time on Rayburn. I'd say 99.9% of the guys on Rayburn that win power fish for the most part. You know, I mean, we're not out there. Very few times is drop shotting or throwing a wacky rig or anything like that gonna win you a tournament. I'm not saying it can't, but chances are there's other ways to win, where in some lakes you go and that's the only thing you can do. So you kind of have to look at the lakes you're going to. As like I said, Livingston was more of just try to get bites, you know. So that's where I looked at, is just try to get bites, and chances are if those bites were the right bites, you're gonna win. You're never gonna catch a bunch on Livingston. Rayburn, you're trying to get bites, but you're trying to get bites a certain way. And so whether that be shallow, deep, whatever you're doing, you know, you're trying to put yourself in a position to catch big ones, because Rayburn's one of those lakes that if you get around big fish, they will bite. They're not the hardest fish in the world to trick. They're the hardest fish in the world to find and stay on top of, and they move and timing, and it's just one of those weird lakes. They're very rarely dependable on Rayburn. It's hard to fish a lake over there for 2, 3, 4 days straight and do the same thing. It just doesn't happen. So as I progressed on to other lakes, Toledo's a totally different one. Toledo is not as versatile as Rayburn. Rayburn, you can do everything you want to do versatile, in the sense of you can win a tournament doing anything and you catch a big fish doing everything. Toledo, you'll look up over there and 20 out of the top 20 are all fishing deep. Or we've had coasters down there where 10 out of 10 are all sight fishing, or they're all shallow. I mean, it is a lake that is a little, and it's way bigger and it's way harder, but it's not as versatile as Rayburn. Usually the winning pattern, all the patterns are the winning pattern, in the sense of if you're fishing deep, almost everyone in the top 10 is fishing deep. So that you got to put Toledo in that category. You got to put Rayburn in this category, and Livingston in this category, and then when you get to Texoma, you put it in a different category, and Ray Roberts, and I mentioned all Texas lakes, you know, because that's where I started. And then all of a sudden now I go down to Florida, and Florida's a whole different animal, because you can sit there and catch 100 of these and then catch a giant, you know. And so giants go a lot further down there, because you can catch a lot of small ones and then catch giant ones. One of the guys that asked me one of the questions is from Lanier. Lanier's one of those places I've only been to once, but it was a very finessey type deal. But the day before the tournament, I was smashing them on a 6X deep, and I was power fishing for them in practice and catching them really well. Of course, then things started to change, and the finesse bite was really good. If you saw Hallman at the tour event, caught him out deep on day 1, and then threw a little swim bait on day 2, did something different on day 3, then went up there and threw a spinnerbait on day 4. So it can change, you know, that play seemed to change, and you could do a little bit of both. Chickamauga was like that, where you saw some guys finessing around, catching them, and then some sight fishing play. Dudley was finessing them right in the same places where people were power fishing them. I mean, it's one of those deals that tournament fishing, you've got to really figure out the lake you're on, but you really just got to get bites. Getting bites is the key to all the tournaments you're going to fish. And if you can produce bites, that's the best thing going. Now, when I say that, here's a problem with producing bites. If you're going to practice fish, which I think practice fishing is probably the hardest thing to teach people to do. If you're out there flipping down bushes, and there's 1,000 bushes, which seems like a lot in the lake, and you see 100 guys doing it, it's not hard for every person to go out there and flip 100 bushes a day. It's quite easy. So now you got 100 guys flipping 100 bushes a day. That bite's going to go away, and that's not that good. So finding that pattern or that way to generate bites isn't very good if everyone's doing it. And that's that's what I've learned over Rayburn is, what I couldn't figure out is that all my practices when I first started fishing Rayburn were so good. It was so easy to catch 20, 25 pounds. And I never could catch 20, 25 pounds in the tournament. And so I think that's the biggest key, is like trying to go out there and figure out an area to get bit in, to me, is way more important now. And then I know fish are there. And so because I got bit there, right, I generated bites. So now I know this area is halfway good. And then I try to look around, and I kind of watch people for different reasons. I'm not watching what they're doing. I'm just making sure they're not doing what I'm doing. And so, or I go into an area and be like, all right, this looks pretty obvious. Everyone who comes in here is going to catch them this way. What's another way to catch them? I'll tell you a story. This is kind of my philosophy when it comes to these things. When I first started fishing Rayburn, in the summertime I came down and was fishing, and this whole deal was about flipping grass. And I went out there and it was hard for me to do it. I mean, I got bit, but it really wasn't, there was no consistency, there was nothing. And Dickie Newberry, I didn't know him at the time. Me and him are pretty good friends now, but at the time I didn't know him. And I'd heard of him though. And I was sitting there looking around going, that guy has got 20 years on me on fishing Rayburn, 20 years on me flipping grass. And I'm supposed to try to beat him at a grass flipping tournament. And I've done it for 2 or 3 days now, or one day. He's done it for 20 years. And I was going, there's no way. There's no way I can beat this guy flipping grass in his own backyard when he's been doing it for so much longer than me. And so what I did was, over the next year in the summertime, I figured out and went totally opposite from what everyone was doing. I threw different stuff in the grass. I went and did other stuff and not fish the grass. I did everything possible but flip grass. And the reason I did that is if I could figure out my own thing, then I didn't have to worry about trying to beat Dickie doing his deal of flipping grass. And so what it did was it taught me a whole bunch of things about a whole bunch about Rayburn and a whole bunch of ways to catch them that I don't think anyone ever figured out. And so that's where it happened to it from there to, looking at people throw like rattle traps or red eyes in the grass. I'm like, well, what's another way I can catch them? And then in the springtime, everyone was flipping trees and doing this. Well, what's another way I can catch them other than flipping? And so I learned how to flip, and I learned how to flip grass and bushes and throw a rattle trap in the grass over time, because that's still probably the easiest way to get bit some of those times. But if you can figure out that other deal that no one's on, at times you have the entire lake to yourself. You can go behind anyone you want to. And so that's a big deal. Tournament fishing, like I said, these aren't questions about actual fishing on just trying to catch fish. It's tournament fishing. So you got to look at all that. You got to look at who you're up against, your competition, what they're doing. Can they figure this out? And figure out another way. And my way was like, I'm gonna figure out a whole different way to catch them than everyone else, and that just fit my style. So I also like to run around a lot. That's also only because of where I grew up. On Livingston, you could go flip by a log or a stump or a boat dock, and when you caught a fish there, you really didn't have to have timing for the most part. You could roll up there, and if a fish lived there, it was going to bite on first cast. And that was the only fish you were going to, catch there most of the time. And then you would go back, you would have to wait in like a whole nother week for another fish to start using that as its home. So I got into just finding as many spots as I could, right? How could I find as many spots? Because that way I could go make one cast on each spot. As I moved on, I realized that wasn't the case on most other lakes, that you could go back to places and catch more fish. There was more than just one there. And so that was hard for me. What it did was teach me how to find a lot of spots, a lot of fish, and I like to run and gun. I've now had to slow down a little bit at times. I can do a little bit of both now because you get on these other lakes where they school up, and that's not the case. I'm still a guy who cannot sit on one spot all day long. Never done it. I did it one tournament my entire life in the All-American, and in 3 days it was my worst day. I told myself I was going to do it, and I did all right, but it was my worst day of the 3 days. So it's just not in my makeup to do that. So that's what I would say is, finding fish and learning how to figure out how to catch them a different way in your style. It doesn't have to be a different way that's so crazy. It just has to be your style. And usually your style is what you're best at. So I would go with that. The other thing is your equipment might be one of the most overlooked things that people look at or don't take serious enough. And what I mean by that is all these rods and reels and line and baits and everything everyone uses or promotes or does whatever. I really liked YouTube and doing videos. And here's why. Is because on my videos that I make, you can see I'm actually using the stuff that I promote. And there's a reason for that. Is I'm not some big name. I'm not getting paid a whole bunch of money. I'm not doing any of this stuff. My deal is I'm going to use something that is going to be beneficial to me to make money in tournaments, because I don't think I'll ever make enough money from people to substitute using whatever that I have to use, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is I'm not going to switch companies because I would get paid more or anything like that. And I know this is getting real tech, but I'm going to use what I think is going to be the best possible way for me to get a fish in the boat. So I'm going to use the best bait I can. I'm going to use the best rods I can, the best reels, the best line. And I'm not going to substitute that for anything lesser. So when I use this stuff or I talk about this stuff, these videos are great because you actually see me using what I'm talking about. And that's a big deal. So like for example with rods, I'm not a big guy with what it says on the label of a rod. I use rods based on what the feel is and how I like them. So, and what their purpose is. And what I mean by that is figure out what you're trying to accomplish with fishing tournaments or how you're trying to fish and get stuff that matches that. And so, do your research, but test stuff out. I mean, that to this day, that's how we figure everything out, is we go out there and we test things out. And we're like, hey, this rod is close, but it's not right. I like this rod. I don't care what it says on the label. This works for me. And rods are probably the biggest one. They're not all made for everyone. I fish with Russell all the time. I fish with a lot of guys, and we still throw a lot of the same rods, but I will throw a rod when I frog fish different than he will, or sight fish different than him. My hook set's different than him. Your hook set is probably different than people you know. And that matters with what rod. And so like my whole deal is this: if I don't ever lose fish on a rod doing a certain thing, that's what I'm going to use all the time. I don't care if it's the right rod or whatever they want to call it. If I don't lose fish, then I know it's good. And so it's the same thing with line. Everyone always asks me about, cranking. And I'm like, I crank with 20-pound test line, like deep diving crankbaits. And they're like, why? And I'm like, why not? And I always ask people why. Like, I can't wait for people. I want people to give me an explanation as to why they do things. And so if you're going to tell me, hey, I always use it this way, I don't ever worry about breaking off, I catch them doing this or that, and you have, a good answer, then I'm all for it. So pay attention to what you're using. Pay attention to the bait you're using, the line, the rod, and the reel. Everything else, no one's ever going to have the best equipment when it comes to a boat. No one's going to have the best electronics. We all have different electronics. When I grew up and then when I was in high school, I didn't have any electronics. I didn't even have my own boat. I had to fish out of buddies and older people's boats, and I never even looked at the graph. And all I did was just look in the water and go fishing. And that's still the case to this day. I still do a lot of that. You know, I still don't necessarily need a graph a lot of times on the boat. John Cox has basically made a living doing that. So, you know, we're all going to have different scenarios of like, this guy might have the newest equipment out there ever. But that doesn't mean, you know, you can't go do what you need to do. You just figure out the best way for you to go fish. So, like I said, what that basically entails is fish your strengths, do what you're good at, get good at those, and then try to slowly get better at other stuff. You don't have to get better at it right away, but you can slowly get better at it, and you can figure it out one day. I still, to this day, I'll probably go out tomorrow and I'm gonna go try something. I caught fish the other day in the grass. I'll have that video up probably before this one, and so I know where some fish are in the grass. I'm gonna go back out there and I'm gonna try something different out there. I'm gonna try to learn something different, just like I'm talking about here. As I know how to catch them that way, I'm gonna go to those same spots and do different things there. I don't know if I'm gonna throw a big swim bait, a little swim bait, a glide bait. I might throw something on the bottom. I don't really know. I'm just gonna go fish around those areas and try to figure out another way to catch them. And I continually do this right now. So that's my advice on tournament fishing or just getting started in it. Is that won't come when you're trying to learn all that and trying to figure out how to catch them and trying to win a tournament. Winning tournaments are hard, right? Sometimes you don't even deserve a win, and wins just happen. But it's a progression, and so you're trying to figure out how to catch fish. And once you feel comfortable about doing that, you're trying to figure out how to catch bigger ones and bigger ones and bigger ones. And I'm not a big guy of like, hey, I'm gonna start over here to go try to catch a limit, or man, at this point in time, especially like on most places or one day events, I go after the 5 biggest ones from the start to the finish. So you have to look at one day events compared to 3 or 4 day events. We always joke you can't win a tournament on day one, but you sure can lose it. So, you know, you just have to look at all of it and try to be really educated on how you're going to approach the tournament. You know, like I said, take all those things into the weather, how many people are in it, how big of a lake it is, all these things, and what equipment you're going to use, everything. You gotta think about it. It's something you should be thinking about from the minute you get on that lake to practice. The entire time through practice, you should be thinking about this. As soon as you get done practicing, you should think about your game plan for the next day. You shouldn't have a game plan as to, I'm going to hit all these spots in order. It's, okay, this is how I'm going to start, I think, because sometimes people might be on their spot, so you might have to adjust, but you have to think of everything and really look ahead to what might happen, put scenarios in place and be like, okay, if this scenario happens, I might do this. And just be really, really prepared for all these things. And even then, you can't be prepared because, man, you might have trolling motor break, you might have all kinds of things happen. But if you're prepared for that, know that it might happen, you can adjust. But those are some of my tips. Some of them are really, really basic. Some of them are kind of next level thinking of, I want you guys to really think about what you're trying to accomplish out there. And catching fish should be a good accomplishment, but man, let's, try to go bigger than that. Try to go, okay, if we can do that, let's try to win. And sometimes you get on lakes that, man, it's just hard. It's hard to even catch a fish. So sometimes just catching fish is the biggest accomplishment, and it might get you further. But those are some of my tips on, say, first year tournament fishing, what you're preparing for and what you're trying to do when you're into these tournaments. Say, and this doesn't matter if you're high school, college, or 40 years old. I mean, you want to fish your first tournament ever. It applies to everyone. So anyways, that's some of my tips. I figured I'd do a video on it and better help explain my thinking rather than just writing one word, hey, be prepared, hey, stuff like that really doesn't help. I mean, we all know we got to be prepared, but trying to figure out other ways to really think outside the box and really forward think about what you're trying to do. So hope you enjoyed, hope it helps.